So the other day, I'm just sitting around and thinking about the Yeti of Fremont, or the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the thing that they saw in Fremont. Well, anyway, I decided that, hey, I'm going to go out and look for it, and I'm going to learn a little bit more about it. So I went to the internet and did find an article. So this came from USA Today Network of Wisconsin, and the information had been taken from a Post-Crescent article written back in 1968. So this article places you in Fremont, Wisconsin, with a frightening flurry of monstrous encounters marked by perhaps one of the greatest Halloween seasonal practical jokes in Wisconsin history. That's the rationale, and the safer of two explanations. Multiple sightings of a Yeti, otherwise called Bigfoot or Sasquatch, haven't been fully resolved in Fremont in all these years since the creature became the talk of the town. These accounts were chronicled in national magazines and even television. The Wapaka County Village's 2-month saga is mentioned in a number of books on unexplained phenomena in Wisconsin. If it was indeed a prankster, nobody ever confessed, and no one ever came forward to name him. So just thinking, again, this happened in 1968. So if someone indeed was a prankster, they're getting quite up there in age now. So I think it's time for them to come out and confess. Today, you'll be hard-pressed to find a conversation on the Yeti scare among folks in Fremont. The story pretty much dried up in the decades that followed. The fiasco, one that began on October 19th and ran past Christmas that year, isn't a part of civic signage or included in any of the village's tourist brochures. But back then, a number of witnesses described encounters with the creature lurking through the marshland and the countryside. It stood 8 or 9 foot tall, and they said weighed about 600 pounds, and it was covered in curly brown hair and walked on 2 feet. Rick Jones was an employee of Mob's Bait and Tackle in Fremont, and he would perk up and chuckle when stories began to circulate about the Fremont Bigfoot. Although there's no better place than a bait shop for some tall tales, I haven't heard anything about that in years, he said. So back in 1968, those sightings grew interest from the national magazine called Argosy. Its writer was named Ivan Sanderson, and it posted just 2 possibilities after listening to the first-hand accounts. After all, it was deer hunting season, and no one could have been stupid as to enter the fields disguised as an animal. Either it was a deranged person in a monkey suit attempting suicide, or it was one of the half-dozen or so kinds of man creatures that we call collectively abominable snowmen. That is what Sanderson wrote at the time. Now, the Post-Crescent writer Roger Pitt wrote several times about the sightings and said that for many in Fremont, it was mostly a fun thing. It was kind of almost like a party. It wasn't so much fun for Conservation Warden Lawrence McKevitt, who didn't know what to make of the situation after the earliest reports. He was on the job on October 19th when a group of 12 startled deer hunters came forward. And although McKevitt didn't see the beast, he told the Post-Crescent at the time that he too couldn't believe someone would be so foolish as to dress up as an animal in the fields during deer hunting season. The hunters saw something out there, he said, and the reports were enough to draw in Dr. Bernard Hulvemans of the Royal Institute of National Sciences of Belgium. He paid a visit to Fremont as part of Sanderson's story that reached the April 1969 issue of Argosy. Hulvemans had some fame and had been nicknamed the Sherlock Holmes of zoology. He has since been dubbed the father of cryptozoology, founder of the pseudoscience dedicated to finding mythical creatures or examples of extinct species still living. So Hovelmans kept a straight face even as others laughed while the hunters tried to rationalize what they saw according to the report. Now McKevitt, according to the Post-Crescent reports, came to figure that if there was a beast, it was a vegetarian. Canary grass had been chewed down to the water level, but a nearby deer carcass was left untouched. Now he assumed that the creature apparently liked to drink, and that was based on a big pile of beer cans stuck in an area where the sightings were reported. The unfolding saga captured interest. A group of snowmobilers went out on December 14th to hunt for tracks after Fremont finally achieved a decent snow cover. Tracks had been found earlier, but reports suggested that even the most ardent of Yeti believers weren't convinced. McKevitt's wife, speaking on his behalf, said that they looked like the prints of a good-sized man wearing swim fins. Soon after, a party atmosphere lost its sizzle. So, was it a prank, or was it a Yeti? Back then, most thought it was a hoax. But there was an unnamed 22-year-old Waiwiga man who was among the few people who emerged as suspects. But again, nobody confessed. Many of the locals of the time heard a thing or two. Some heard that it was a guy in raccoon suits standing on top of a barrel to achieve an intimidating height. But it is likely one of Wisconsin's greatest practical jokes. But for the lack of a solid culprit, the folks of Fremont, a village then less than 1,000 people, have some quirky folklore on their hands. For about 2 months, imaginations ran wild in Fremont, Wisconsin, with the possibility of the Deltox marsh monster, or the Fremont Yeti. McKevitt later told a magazine that he thought hunters were sincere, but their description might be the result of an overactive imagination. By the end of 1968, Lauren Frasier, who was the undersheriff of Waupaca County, didn't care one way or the other. He was pulled into the mix when reports reached a national television program, and he expressed worry for the community's reputation should the stories continue. Frasier's advice was that if any residents saw a Yeti, they should just leave it be. He told the Post-Crescent he had more things to do than chase fiction.